Hello, welcome back. Thank you so much for being here. Today is one of my absolute favorite videos to film. This is the best eyeshadow palettes for fall. So I have narrowed it down to 10 palettes, and this was pretty hard, but I'm very happy with my selections. And these are in no particular order, but the first palette I have to mention is from Too Faced, and this is their new Aptly in Love eyeshadow palette. So you could easily mention any Too Faced fall palette in their tin packaging. I actually had several in this roundup, but I think they all count as an honorable mention, and you could easily fill up this video with Too Faced fall palettes, but I wanted to pull their newest one because this is easily some of the best work they've done in terms of their fall holiday palettes. The formula is an improvement. It's still not the absolute top tier best eyeshadow formula there is, no, but it still seems to me to be a little bit better than some of the other Too Faced palettes we've had in recent years. And I think the quality in here is actually really good. The shimmers feel a little less dry to me than some of their others. The mattes are very, very buttery. The shades in here are just so beautiful. I think they did a really great job going with the apple theme of the palette. Sometimes I don't feel like the color story necessarily speaks to the theme of the palette quite as well, but this one really does. I love that they put in these reds, these greens. I will be honest with you, the greens are not my favorite part of this palette. I feel like we could have easily skipped maybe some of these browns or even a pink and added in a deeper green matte, and I think that would have tied the greens in quite a bit nicer to me. When I'm using color, I really do tend to go very monochromatic. Not everyone does. Some people are far more creative than I am, but I just wish there was maybe a deeper matte green, and I think that would have pulled things together just a little bit better. That being said, this is still a very beautiful palette. It does have a bit of a stronger apple spice kind of scent. I'm not a huge fan of that, but I do love this palette. I love the way they incorporated color in here. I actually love the reds they've put in here as well, because the other shades I'm actually able to use that red. I have never liked red eyeshadow on myself, but with this palette I've actually been creating looks with the red and actually really, really loving them. So I have to say that is major points for this palette. The pinky browns are pretty standard for Too Faced, but with the reds and the greens too, and these deeper mulberry type shades, I think they just tie in very, very well to give us a very fall-esque color story. When I look at this, you can't not think apple picking, apple orchards, but also the way they've got that sort of apple spice scent also takes me straight to the holidays, thinking of apple cider. So I think this is such a great fall palette. I'm really happy with their release this year. Next, I pulled an ABH palette, and I believe this is their palette from last year. This is the Fall Romance palette. I was also looking at their Rose Metals palette, but I can't really say that I think that's one of the best because I never have any idea how to use that palette. This one too is on the grungier side, but it makes more sense to me than the Rose Metals. So this one is really very pretty. I love that we have these more grungy browns. We have these pops of purple as well. The shade Fireside is just the prettiest rose gold shimmer. I think it's absolutely stunning. All of the shades do play so well with one another. Greens and purples are my absolute go-tos if I'm going for a more colorful look, but these just add a grunginess to it that very, very much makes me think of fall. Fall is definitely the season of darker eyeshadow, smokier eye looks, fun things like that, and this palette will definitely give that to you. I think this one is so pretty, so I had to pull this one, and I do hope that they are coming out with a fall palette this year. I noticed that they did not come out with a summer palette like they usually do, so I am really hoping we do get a fall palette from ABH. A palette that is actually newer to my collection and will probably be in my August speed reviews is from Sigma, and this is the Cool Neutrals palette. So they actually released this one back in May, But I didn't pick this one up until July, and I've only just now been having the time to play with it as much as I would like. So I like this one. This is called the Cool Neutrals, and you can see from this color story, it's definitely not as cool toned as you would think by the name. But I do love the outer packaging of this, the way it's kind of very rock inspired. But inside you have some of these warmer browns down here, you have these cooler browns up here, you have some purples, you have some pinks, you actually have a blue pop here as well. And I just think it's so pretty. And the way they've designed this palette is that you can use it in quads, or you can even just use it in duos. If you just want a matte and a shimmer, you can just do that, and they're all perfectly paired. I love that because it just makes it so easy to decide what you want to do. I love it. And I just think this is overall such a pretty palette. And because we do have these cooler tones, we have some of these grungier tones up here, but we also have some very neutrals, and then we have this mustard kind of brown. It just looks very fall to me. I do think it a little strange that it came out in May. It just looks a little bit grungy to me. So for me, this is a perfect fall palette, and I will definitely be reaching for it a ton this fall. I only pulled 2 palettes from Natasha Denona, and that was another one where I was really trying to decide the ones I like best for this season, because I love all of her palettes. I just do. But in trying to narrow down the 2 that I'm most likely to reach for in the fall, I chose the Yucca palette, which I think is so perfect. Again, green is a type of shade that I go for so much in the fall. I know this was her summer release last year, but there is something about this one that is just so fall-esque to me, with all of these greens. Some of them are definitely bright. You know, this shade up here is definitely very bright as well. But we also have this grungy gunmetal gray. We have these forest greens. We have these oranges. I can't look at this palette without thinking fall. And so this is definitely the time when I'm going to pull this out again, and I'm going to be creating all of the green looks because that's what I love to do with this palette. This is definitely my favorite green. And it's funny because I've heard people say that this color story is really ugly, and it kind of is, but when you just look at it in a sense of a green eyeshadow palette with some different pops here and there, I think it becomes a lot more palatable and exciting, especially if you love green eyeshadow. And the other Natasha Denona palette I pulled is the My Dream palette. So I really like this one. So we do have some neutrals. We have some deeper pinks in here as well. We have some grungy deep purples, we have some blacks, some deeper browns. This palette is just very grungy to me, and again, that's just another thing that calls me back to fall. And I always love Natasha Denona shadows. I've said this before, she has my very favorite eyeshadow formula. So this is the other one that I love to pull out during the fall. Any other time of year, to me, it just feels a little bit too deep and grungy and smoky. It doesn't have to be, but that's how it seems to me. So during the fall is when I love pulling out this palette. Okay, a palette that came out last year that I did not expect to love, but I've been thinking about it for months and months is the Huda Beauty Pretty Grunge palette. Again, we're leaning into these grungy tones. I loved this palette so much when I tried it out last year. I always look forward to Huda's larger holiday palettes because these are her best formulas. Her 9 pans are very hit and miss, but these palettes are always of excellent quality. The way she plays with texture is phenomenal. I have always said Huda is kind of the queen of texture, and I still believe that because she comes out with these more unique textures than any other brand. Natasha Denona does play with a lot of different formulas, and I love them, but Huda just thinks so much more outside the box than anyone else. And it's not always a win, but it is exciting to see what she comes up with. For example, this black eye gloss here, I am not going to use that shade. Ever. It is a shiny, oily black eyeshadow. I'm just not going for that. But it's definitely thinking outside the box. We also had those weird sort of petri dish shades in some of her past holiday palettes. Those were weird, but they were thinking outside the box. But she also has this sort of very foiled formula. This shade in particular has green, it has silver, it has pink, it has purple. It's so fascinating. It's definitely a very foiled shade, but it kind of mimics whatever shade is underneath it, whatever shade you use as your base colors. So I just find it fascinating, but overall this is such a grungy palette. You do have these more neutral, easy to choose from shades here. This first six, very, very neutral. Up here, we're kind of pinky purple, and then in the middle, you've got these deep black, gray, very deep purple. You have the deep, deep options right in the middle, and that's what makes this palette grungy, but also just so incredibly wearable. I mean, when I first looked at this palette, I thought there is no way I'm going to love that, and it ended up being one of my absolute favorite palettes of the entire year. So even though I've been wanting to pull this out, every time I do, I look at the color story and I'm like, and I always think to myself, yeah, but it's just so fall, it doesn't feel right. But now that it is fall, you can bet I will be using this so much when I'm not testing other palettes, because I love this one. This is probably the easiest to work with grungy eyeshadow palette. And the looks don't always have to come out very grungy, but they are so beautiful. This palette is just absolutely fantastic. Okay, the next palette is actually an affordable option, and this is one that is actually a dupe of a past holiday palette from Huda Beauty. So this is from Alter Ego, and this is the Mirage eyeshadow palette. This one is, of course, a play on the Huda Beauty Empowered palette. So this came out the year before Pretty Grunge, and this is another one that does have some texture. She does have some of these cream shadows in here, and there's also sort of like a balmy shade. It's a shimmer, but it's kind of like a balm. It's really, really interesting. And what I love about this is Alter Ego does create dupes for very expensive high-end eyeshadow palettes, which we all love, especially in this day and age. But they do also try to replicate the different formulas that are in the palettes, and they actually do a really good job. I would not expect them to be able to dupe the formulas quite so well, but they really actually do. And also, when it comes to the shade layout, they always tend to change the layout so that the color story ends up looking more cohesive. So it's easier to figure out, rather than a lot of the higher end brands kind of lay the shades out all chaotic. I don't know why they do that, but they tend to have a bit more of a chaotic layout, and then Alter Ego comes out with it and they make it make sense. So I absolutely love that. And while they absolutely dupe the color story, the textures, everything like that, there are some tonal differences to the shades, which is perfectly fine. That doesn't bother me. On the eyes, the looks are going to end up quite similar. The Empowered palette is one that I did not purchase initially because I looked at the color story. I thought that's way too grungy. I'm not going to do it. I also hate yellow golds. I'm just not going to like that palette. I'm going to pass on it. And then Alter Ego actually sent this to me, and I thought, okay, why not? I have it, let's try it. I love this palette. This is so good. The shades in here are beautiful. I still don't love a yellow gold, but the shades in here are actually beautiful. The creams are so easy to work with. I do prefer to use them as liners. This shade here, I did not think I would like. I actually do. It's so beautiful. It definitely looks very, very shiny and foiled on the lids. And while this is a more grungy color story, it is so easy to create looks, much like the Pretty Grunge. It's very easy to create looks that aren't grungy, or that are, but you can customize it to be what you want. It doesn't have to be a super dark grungy look. It can be something very wearable, but definitely very fall. So I love this one for fall, of course, because of everything I just said. We do have these really warm toasty browns here, which I love for fall. And then you do have those golds, but you have some of these deep purples, and then again, more deep purples, some deeper browns, a black. Everything about this is just very, very fall. It's grungy, but it's wearable. There's a neutralness to it that makes it easy. And I just find it to be an actually very, very flattering color story. So I think Alter Ego did an incredible job with this palette. Another affordable palette is, I believe, one that came out in January, but this is from ColourPop, and this is their Twilight palette. So I bought this purely off nostalgia because I am a Twilight fan. And look at this color story. So this is one that I do believe they beautifully captured the essence of the Twilight movie. They were definitely going for the essence of Forks, Washington, which is where the movie takes place. But I think they did such a good job. It's definitely very, very gloomy, Pacific Northwest, rainy, all of that. So I do think they did a beautiful job capturing the essence of the movie. But in doing that, they came out with these deeper greens, these deeper blues. There are some pressed glitters in here, so I don't love that. But then you also get these silvers. This is a very cool tone palette. And even though this came out in January, I have always said that I feel like this would have been so good in the fall. I don't know if they're planning to restock and do a massive re-release of this one in the fall. Maybe they'll come out with a part 2. I don't know. But to me, these greens and blues and silvers are just the essence of fall to me. And I do think the Twilight movies are definitely a series I love to watch come fall. It's just very cozy to me. So I think this palette is absolutely beautiful for fall, and I will definitely be creating a lot more looks with this palette within the coming months. Next is from Tarte, and this is their Maneater palette. So again, at the time I'm filming, I don't know if they're coming out with a big fall palette this year. They did just release their 25 years palette. I'm hoping they'll have a nice fall palette, but I believe 2 years ago they had the original Maneater, and this is the Maneater Nightfall palette. So this is kind of the part 2. I didn't pick up the first one, but this one I did pick up when it came out last year, and I love this palette. So first of all, I do love their Amazonian clay formula. It is their better formula. They do have another one that is a little bit more sheer. You really need to work to build it up, but I've always loved the Amazonian clay formula. It also smells really good. It's just a really nice formula. It's really easy to blend, very easy to work with. They do have 2 different shimmer formulas. One is a bit smoother but very shiny, and one is actually a little bit more chunky, which I don't love, but the Amazonian clay palettes are always their very best. So this one brings us a lot of these more jewel tones that I love for fall. So we get some purples, we get some greens, we do have this bright pop here, which is just kind of fun. We get some of these very warm toasty browns in here as well, and this palette I just love because it does lean into those more jewel tones, and that's just my absolute favorite for fall. But it's not so colorful that I'm uncomfortable with it. Like I said, I'm a neutral lover, so color kind of frightens me sometimes. But this is just one that allows me to get into those more jewel tones, but also allows me to maintain my reserved, neutral loving self. So I love this palette. I think it's great, and the formula in here is beautiful. And I really love the packaging on these as well. And the very last palette I want to mention is from an indie brand. It's also been an indie makeup discovery year, which has been really fun and really interesting. But this is from Blend Bunny, and this is their Longing palette. This is incredible. So I have just ordered a new one from Glaminatrix, and I think that's going to be a really beautiful fall palette as well. But I don't have it yet, so I needed to talk about this one. I do think this can be considered a very summer color story because we do have some really bright pops in here, but for me, I have to pull this one for fall because of these greens especially. I love green for fall, we know that by now, but these are just so fantastic. You do have a row of these more greeny blue shades, and then we have this more kind of slate gray row. It's kind of blue, but it's a very wearable blue. And then we have purple. I also just love purples for fall because I normally do pull a fully purple eyeshadow palette, but this one gives me the purple, it gives me the green, it gives me a little bit of a twist with some of these grays without going too intensely blue, and I just think it's so beautiful. And the formulas in here, the shimmers in this palette are absolutely unmatched. I always thought I knew what people were talking about when they said indie brands do shimmers and intense foiled shades and jewel chromes better than anybody else. And I was like, yeah, that's probably true. Being in Canada, it's harder for me to get my hands on these more indie brands, but this color story reeled me in. I purchased it. I absolutely fell in love with it. The shimmers are just unmatched. And of course, with the purples and the greens and the blue, I think it's going to be absolutely perfect for the fall. I'm so excited to play with it. I'm sure when I get the Glaminatrix palette in, I'm going to love that too, and I think that's going to be a fall staple, but because I don't have it yet, I can't include it, and I don't know. But that is my overall top 10 picks for this fall. Of course, there are a lot of palettes, and there are a lot that I do think of when it comes to fall, but these are the 10 that I am the absolute most excited for this year, and that is it for me today. So let me know down below, what are your favorite fall eyeshadow palettes? What are you most excited for this fall? Are you a fall lover like I am? Because it is my absolute favorite season. I'm so excited. Let me know all of your thoughts down below. I love hearing from you guys so much. If you're new here, I hope you'll consider subscribing before you go. I do upload new videos every single week. Thank you again so very much for watching, and I will see you in my next one. Bye!